Yeah, I guess I want to thank the organizers here today, Mohammed and the rest of the team, Ken up front here, for giving me an opportunity to speak to you guys about fixing the math problem really in engineering. And kind of the historical perspective of this is, over a decade ago at Wright State University, we started looking at, why is it that we can't graduate more than, 20-some% of our entire incoming population, which is similar to the nationwide statistic. About 1 out of 3 students nationwide that wants an engineering degree actually is successful and crosses the finish line. Okay? And so if you take a hard look at the curriculum, you start to realize that the primary problem nationwide at HBCU institutions and every other institution is really the required curriculum itself. Right? The fact that we've got Calculus 1, Calculus 2, Calculus 3, differential equations in the curriculum as a prerequisite for classes like statics, dynamics, electric circuits, computer programming. And then if you keep in mind that the median student in the country that wants to be an engineer has an ACT math of about 24, which places them in college algebra, 2 semesters behind Calculus 1. What you've got is an engineering curriculum in the United States that is inaccessible to the median incoming student in the country. So as soon as your curriculum is inaccessible to the median incoming student, you don't have much of a chance of doing a better job. And one thing I'll point out is over the years, I do a lot of visiting institutions about this and about math. And I want you to keep in mind that it has nothing to do with how good the students are. And so if you go to the finest institutions in the country, if you go to places like UT Austin, I was at SUNY Binghamton in the fall, their average SAT is 1340. And their success rate in calculus is about 60%. And their degrees in engineering are 50-some%. UT Austin, 56% get engineering degrees. A lot of the students get degrees somewhere else. Okay, but again, it doesn't matter how high we set the threshold, how good the students are. Okay, it is the whole idea that the traditional way that we bottleneck the curriculum is what is designed to keep students out. If you think about success rates of about 60% typically in classes like calculus, and less than that in classes like college algebra. Nationwide, the success rate in a course like that is more like 50%. Okay, then think about what happens when you stack up a whole sequence of these classes. Your throughput is 0.6 to the 4th power. Okay? And so that's the problem. So the question is, what are you going to do about that? And that is our project here, and this talk is called Uncorking the Bottleneck to URM Student Success. Wright State University is a mid-sized state institution. We get, say, between 300 and 400 new direct from high school students in engineering every fall. It is, anywhere between 18 and 20,000 students total enrollment. We serve everybody from an ACT 16 to 36. Pretty much open access. You get a high school diploma and a 2.0 GPA, and you can come to college. So we get the finest students in the greater Dayton region, kids with ACT 35, 36, and valedictorian of their school. We get those. And we get the kids that went through Dayton public school system and walk in at like a 9th grade math level and somehow start college. So that's it, the entire snapshot. And I think this is one of the reasons why NSF has funded us so heavily over the years. We first came up with an approach to address the math problem in 2003, and through a series of grants that most recently, the last one, a National Model for Engineering Math Education, funded in 2008, but even in 2013, Don Millard actually, who was here earlier today, funded a $400,000 supplement to that grant to add 3 HBCU institutions, and they're here today. So it's Howard University, Morgan State University, and Maryland Eastern Shore that are all now engaged in piloting of what I'm going to talk about today. And so the purpose of this presentation is really kind of to roll out what it is that we propose on how you can really uncork the bottleneck for your students. The fact that it works particularly well for underrepresented students at a predominantly white institution is a notable fact, and it's probably why NSF gave us more money. Your institutions aren't predominantly white. So really, the takeaway here is more, how do you just plain fix the math problem for engineering students? Okay? And the reality is, it has the biggest impact on students at my institution that are underprepared and underrepresented, and so I think that'll translate in relatively large scale to your populations. So, that on the background, the motivation is essentially what we all know, okay, that we're all worried about the future of America. Can we produce enough scientists and engineers in general, but really in particular engineering and computer science? So everything from the gathering storm to short-term economic viability and just plain jobs. How are we going to fill the jobs? So depending upon who you listen to, we need either 1 million more STEM graduates by 2018, or we need 10,000 more engineers a year, or whatever the measure is. We've got to do a better job getting kids across the finish line. Okay, and here's what I would argue. We've all been doing outreach out the wazoo for the last 2 decades, and we've all been doing innovative first-year engineering curriculum with real-world examples and active learning and all this kind of stuff for a long time. Look at the numbers. Nationally, it's still 6.5% of American high school graduates that want to be engineers. The needle hasn't moved. 2 decades of outreach, $1 billion, whatever we spent, the needle hasn't moved. Women in engineering, the needle's not moving, right, in the recruitment pipeline. Retention, what we do in our first year classrooms, no doubt in my mind, things that were started back at places like Drexel, and we've got to get real world and hands-on stuff, that is better education. Here's the thing, it literally doesn't retain people. It literally doesn't. The retention rates nationwide in engineering about the same as they were 2 decades ago. And so the reality is we got to start making a distinction between what are the problems between getting students to make real progress towards degree. Progress towards degree is what retains students, not just getting them excited about applications in real world. And so address that. And then number 2, continue to do a better job of the education, which is I think a lot of what all of these activities are about. All right, so basically what we said is we want to increase retention, motivation, and success by doing math more the way it ought to be taught for engineers, but more importantly, getting the bottleneck out of the way. And so here's what we said. If we don't want to use calculus as a bottleneck for the engineering curriculum, we're going to have an answer for, what do we do instead? And so clearly, when we teach circuits, we're going to have derivatives and integrals and differential equations. And when we teach strength of materials and dynamics, we've got to have some calculus. The question is the path towards preparing students to take the core classes, does that really need to be 3 or 4 semesters of traditional math from a math department, keeping in mind that the starting point for the median kid is a whole year behind that? And if that's the answer, then we're never going to graduate more than 1 in 3 people nationwide. So what we said is, look, let's come up with our own class that we're going to run in the engineering building, taught by engineering faculty. And what we said is, we're the ones that teach all these classes. We teach statics and dynamics and circuits and strength of materials. I mean, how are we actually using math in these actual engineering courses? And this is very different from saying, how can I contrive some real-world examples of why math matters? That might be motivating too. What we did is take it one step further and say, how do we literally connect the math you need to the progress towards your degree so you can see what's coming next semester and the semester after that in the actual classes with the actual course numbers. And you get first-year students believing that they can do the engineering curriculum when they're 3 weeks out of high school. And that's the idea of this. So what we did is said, look, if we comb the sophomore textbooks in engineering, we see these kind of math topics all through these textbooks. And interesting. I don't want to be on the network. And so, it's everything from pre-calc topics like lines and quadratics and trigonometry, all over the place. And in fact, if you talk to calculus profs, they'll tell you the biggest reason kids can't do calculus is because their algebra is bad. Right? And I agree. Right? So we've got some algebra, we've got some trigonometry, but then things that really aren't in the calculus sequence, vectors, complex numbers, things like exponential form and polar notation, all of those things. Sinusoids and signals, which is a topic that engineers, over the years, we just realize when we go and teach a linear systems class, the kids still, they've been through differential equations, and they still can't figure out how to tell me the magnitude and phase when I've got a sine and a cosine as an answer, right? And so these basic kind of things. All the way up to numerical methods, systems of equations, matrices, we spend about 40% of the course on these non-calculus topics that are heavily used in engineering. And then we spend about 60% of the course on traditional calculus. But it is calculus only to the extent that we literally use it in the core engineering classes. And we include isolated kind of examples from upper division also. So problems as high as 4,000 level, mechanical design problems, whatever, those will be in there. But really, the very fundamentals of what a derivative is, right? What an integral is. Here's a set of tools you can use to calculate derivatives and integrals. And by the way, you've got a TIE 89, and you got a cell phone, and you've got MATLAB. So when you see an integral that scares you, don't worry about it. In fact, in our core curriculum, the very first integral we work in class is an integral that can't be solved by hand. And we do that on purpose to kind of take the fear away from all of that. And so then finally we finish differential equations with constant coefficients. That one topic, which is like one chapter in a differential equations book, it's pretty much 90% of all differential equations you're actually going to solve in an engineering classroom. All right, and so we cover that one topic. But key thing, it's all real applications from core classes. Not so much real world, but real curriculum. So it's real world to the extent that whatever's in the circuits book is real world. And then we have hands-on laboratory exercises like shown here. So these are kind of interesting. What they are is labs that are designed to illustrate math. And so much like you would do in physics with a free fall lab here, in physics you're trying to measure acceleration due to gravity. But here, what we're trying to do is illustrate the definition of the derivative. So if you track the projectile at 3 frequencies, 20 hertz, 40 hertz, 80 hertz, then a student can actually see burned onto a piece of paper what we mean by the limit as delta t approaches 0. All right, so this is not avoid the mathematical rigor, don't tell them what it really, it's the exact opposite. It's have them really fundamentally understand what calculus is. Whether or not they can do a double integral with a trig substitution and an integration by parts, I actually don't care for my sophomore year of engineering. If they learn that skill later on in the required math sequence and it helps develop their analytical problem-solving skills, whatever, that's great. But that's not what should be bottlenecking the advancement of students. And so that's it. And we also use the class to really have a bunch of MATLAB integrated throughout, which really helps in our curriculum. But here's the key thing. This class now replaces the traditional prerequisites for the entire first 2 years of engineering. So General Physics 1, statics, dynamics, electric circuits, thermodynamics, strength of materials, all of it. C or better in this class, and you're moving forward. You're struggling to get a C in calculus? Take a W. It's okay. Welcome to the club. Everybody struggles in calculus. So it's a different message that we send the engineering students. And so just to kind of lay this out, we did this on the quarter system. We have since converted to semesters in 2012, but the longitudinal data I'm going to share was based on an implementation of this in one 10-week quarter. And so, in fact, it's much easier to do this on semesters than it was on quarters. But here's what our traditional curriculum looked like in, for example, mechanical. Pretty similar for electrical. But Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3 on quarters, this was freshman calculus. Everybody's got freshman calculus in the engineering program. And mind you, the median student doesn't start here, they start here. Right, 2 quarters behind that. On semesters, the median student's about a year behind the starting point. Then we come in and we put EGR 101 in place, and we said, look, number 1, let's get calculus out of the fall. It's not even in the fall. Right here, engineering math, why math matters for your chosen degree, taught by engineering faculty with engineering TAs. And then just shift calculus down. But in fact, on quarters, we made it so flexible that we didn't even put Calc 2 on the required degree program in freshman year, right? So we had these 3 quarters. We put Calc 1, and then we just stuck a Gen Ed here. Right? And the whole idea is flexibility of curriculum. If you get a prof you like for Calc 1 and you got an A or a B, then heck, just go ahead and take Calc 2 in the spring. Nobody's stopping you. Okay, but the idea that you got to get through all this calculus or you can't move forward, that's the message that we send students across the country. That's why we can't graduate them. And so we have changed the message. And then finally, just keeping in mind, we did not say that we're not going to have calculus. And so just to be clear, the entire calculus sequence is still required. And so there's no threat to your ABET math requirements or anything else. We've been through ABET twice since we implemented this. And so we still have all of this, but what we've done is stretched it out. Okay? And students end up finishing calculus later on. I mean, here on quarters, we actually had the last one in the junior year, right about the same time they would use things like the divergence theorem, in a junior level class. Question?
Do you have engineering faculty teaching the linear equations and so on? I mean, starting like algebra, or is it still math faculty?
No, so this is engineering faculty that teach the entire course. Okay, and the idea is the primary prerequisite requirement to teach this class is a baccalaureate degree in engineering. Okay, the whole point is we want the credibility of I've been through the curriculum and or I teach this curriculum and I know why the math really matters. Right? And the other thing about it is all of these applications of math, it's not like we cover some physics and then we try and do an example. All of the physics, all of the engineering is just done by immersion. It's pure immersion. Okay? And it's because you can walk into the class, day one, I walk into the class, a lot of the kids have had physics in high school. They haven't all had physics in high school. We're covering equations of lines, and the very first thing I write on the board is the word example. And it's a vehicle during braking, and I say, guess what? The velocity satisfies this equation. V equals V naught plus A times time. You get about half the class that's, oh yeah, I remember that from physics. The other half, what's that? Well, they all drove cars. They know what velocity is. What does the pedal do? It's the accelerator. It doesn't take a lot for an engineering faculty member to, by immersion, introduce the students to the topics as they go and say, look, it's actually just y equals mx plus b. Right? And in the same exact lecture, the first day of class, V equals IR plus a voltage source. What's voltage? Oh, I don't know. I got about 20 kids in the classroom that had some project lead the way and they work with some circuits and they know what it is. They know what Ohm's law is. I got 70 other kids that have never seen this before. It's okay. They've got a battery in their cell phone, right? They've seen the 12 amps on the vacuum cleaner that sits in their dorm. It does not take a lot for an engineering faculty member to connect to physics, right? So very first day of class, I can do V equals IR plus voltage source, F equals KX plus a preload. I can do Y equals MX plus B in every possible way that you would think about it. And every kid in the classroom now has something they can connect to. And we take that approach to every single math topic. The math, there really isn't that much of it. There's a lot more of the application. So what we've done is distilled down what is the math that is really critical, and then we have littered it with the applications the students are going to see again and again and again as they make progress towards degree.
I could agree with that. How did the math department take this?
That was actually my question.
Yeah, so we'll get to that shortly.
Many universities, engineering faculty wanted to control the math sequence.
Yeah, so this is the beauty of this. The beauty of this is we did not take control of the math sequence. So what you see here is the entire required math sequence still taught by the math department. Okay, that's the bottom line. And so the thing is, this thing really wants me to be in the network. Okay, the thing is that, fortunately, I'll show at the end. This material now is very well developed. We've got a textbook published by Wiley now. If you slide that textbook across the table to the calculus committee in the math department and say, yeah, we're going to run this freshman class to prepare kids. Is there anybody there that wants to teach this? Yes. They're going to open up that book and they're going to say, oh, I thought you guys were going to teach math. This doesn't look like math to me. It's got parameters all over it. It's got physical units in every single problem. It's all plots and graphs. It's all engineering. I don't have the content knowledge to teach this class. You guys go ahead and do it. That's the response from the math department. So we had to deal with the initial, we want to develop this curriculum, which scared the heck out of the math department. The way I dealt with that is I made one of them a co-PI on grants that have now received over $5 million from NSF. So that helped. Okay, but the point is, once that barrier is crossed and the curriculum's out there, I'm telling you it's not a barrier anymore. So I'll talk more about the widespread adoption, but we've got 36 at least institutions around the country doing this now, and math faculty don't want to teach this class. Okay, bottom line. All right, so that's the curriculum reform, and then, I want to talk a lot about the assessment, and I also want to realize that I'm the only thing between you guys and lunch, which is at 12:30. So I've got quite a bit of assessment to talk about to convince you guys of possibly pulling the trigger on this. And so initially, just qualitative, was the class doing what we wanted? This is brand new comments from the very first time we threw the course together in 2004. And number one here is the real thing we're going after. I was thinking of dropping engineering, right? I walked in here, ACT wasn't quite where I thought it should be. Math skills weren't that great. Maybe I was in pre-calculus, right? And I took this class, and now I really see why this matters, and I'm going to stick with this. I can do this. So this is all about the efficacy of the student. Okay, but then keeping in mind an important point, this is not remediation. This is the change to the required math sequence. I have a lot to say about remediation, and I'll make some points about that later. Okay, but the point is, these are students that say, I didn't understand calculus in high school. Well, a student that says that took calculus in high school. Okay, so these are some of the more prepared students, and even students with AP credit for Calc 1 and Calc 2 have absolutely no idea why they need an integral in circuits class. Okay, and in general, neither does their teacher. Okay, and it's a critical issue, because these are the kind of strong students that bleed out of the engineering program. And everybody's like, well, we just need to motivate them and get them engaged. We've been doing freshman engineering projects, design, all that stuff for 2 decades. That doesn't keep the kids around. It's better than not doing it. But these top students can be engaged elsewhere. It is when you connect all the requirements to the real progress towards the degree. That's when students feel like they have immediate traction and they're in the right discipline and they're moving forward. And it's true for top students, just like it's true for the students that need an efficacy or a motivation boost. And so it works across the board. All right, so I want to give some, initially kind of ad hoc assessment, and then I'll dive into a longitudinal study with a bunch of statistics and whatnot. But people always ask, like, if I just go and implement this, what can I kind of expect? So this is just the very first time we did this. When we put this course in place in 2004, we changed the degree program requirements for all 6 of our engineering majors, everything except computer science. So this is before and after. It's not some cohort of 22 kids that self-selected. It is new curriculum, starts 04. What do we get? So we had the prior 4-year average across all our academic departments of retention in the first year, which our numbers weren't that bad overall. I mean, overall we were at about 68% fall-to-fall retention of new direct from high school kids prior to the curriculum change. After the curriculum change, it went by 10 percentage points up. Okay, this is majors requiring 101, so there's no CS majors in here. Okay, but the point being, about 150 total students in this population. So we saved about 15 additional sophomores the very first time we tried this. Okay, we later on went and took a look at, so how did the kids do in Calc 1? All right, and you have to keep in mind that Calc 1, they may have taken it the next quarter, maybe not. The curriculum is much more flexible now, right? So what's happening here is a number of things. It's A, did we prepare kids better? Do they understand? Are they more motivated with calculus? Do they know some calculus? That's one effect. A really big effect is they took calculus when we already had our teeth in them, when they already had some progress towards degree, when they already had some confidence, some work ethic, some problem-solving skills. So when you do that, you get a really interesting result. Because the class was only required for everybody except, right, computer science majors. Computer science and computer engineering is about 40% of our enrollment. Okay, and then in addition, you had kids that this was brand new curriculum change, kids that just didn't take the class because they weren't advised right or whatever. So we ended up with about an equal population when we went back about 2 years later to see, okay, that incoming class, the same cohort, some didn't take 101, it's about 150 kids, some did. What's the grade distribution look like? The beauty of this is all these kids are mixed up in the same calculus classes, so the math department doesn't necessarily know. And so here's what we have. Students that didn't take 101, we had a pie chart that looks just like the national pie chart. C or better, right at 60%. Okay? And, by a lot of standards, not that unreasonable, 20% of the kids got A's. but you're getting this huge chunk of D's, F's, and W's. Come over here, the kids that took EGR 101, not a whole lot more A's, no more A's. The A kids don't need help to get an A. Okay. On the other hand, take a look at the B's. The B pie looks just like the B and the C pie over here, and the part that really matters is the C pie looks like the D plus the F plus the W over here. And frankly, I was quite surprised. I thought that the kids would do about the same in calculus, but the bottleneck would be gone, so we'd retain a lot more. Turns out, kids do a lot better in calculus as a result of doing this. It's a combined effect of math and context, understanding the math, seeing the derivative for the second time instead of the first time. It's all of that, but it's just plain later in the curriculum. Right? And we're not jamming the most rigorous sequence in the entire undergraduate curriculum down their throat the minute they walk in the door. So that has a big effect. And then finally, this one that really matters to administrators. Here's the 6-year graduation rates for that fall cohort. This is, did you get an engineering degree at all? This is, did you get any degree from Wright State? So maybe you switched out and you went somewhere else. Pretty compelling results. If you did not take EGR 101, which included almost the entire computer science enrollment, your chance of getting a degree from us was 15%. That is the historical rate in our CS department. We have since addressed computer science. That's a whole other talk. Okay, so I'd be happy to talk about that. But that required core curriculum change. That's what fixed computer science as well. Okay, but over here, look at the difference. So gigantic, 52%, still not great, but our historical numbers were like in the 20s, right? And then, look at this. Even if the kids see what all the math matters for, and they say, okay, here's some circuits, here's some strength of materials, some forces, some motion, some MATLAB, some programming, and I don't like any of it. That's a pretty good reason to switch majors. Right? So you show the kids a window into the curriculum, and even the ones that say, you know what, thanks, but no thanks, they don't leave because we beat them down and made them believe they couldn't do it. They leave because they're just not interested. And as a result, there's no loss in efficacy about being a college student, and our kids earn degrees. If they took our class, 71% earned Wright State degrees. The university average overall is 46%. And engineering students traditionally is lower than the university average because traditionally we beat students down and we make them believe they're not cut out to be in college. Okay? And we do that with our core required curriculum. So I want to talk more about now longitudinal study. What we did is in the year 2012, okay, what we now had was an incoming class in 2004, 2005, and 2006. So 3 years of classes where the latest incoming class still had 6 years to get a degree. Okay? And so we wanted to take that entire population so we could start parsing it out and do statistics and make sure we had significance. And so here is the impact of the curriculum change, right? And it's all based on took EGR 101 or did not, but keep in mind, it's not just the class, it's the whole curriculum change, the decoupling of the calculus and everything else. And here's the difference. This is Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and Calc 4. The populations are in here. And so what it is all incoming students from the year 2000 to the year 2006. We did the curriculum change in 04. So we had 4 entire incoming classes beforehand. That's kind of the traditional baseline. Then we had 3 classes after. Including the after is some students that didn't take it. CS, CEG, it's not required. We had 19 CS majors that did take the class because they get counted for an elective. So everybody's in there, and it's just did you take the class or not, but the end values, 800 traditional, 187 after, is because this was the baseline status quo for the prior 4 years. And so here's what we saw. Statistically significant increase in grades, about a quarter point in Calc 1 and Calc 2. The average a little higher in Calc 3 and Calc 4, but not statistically significant, so I would say about no change. And so what you're seeing is kids actually do better. Keep in mind, we were retaining a lot more students as we went through here. So what we had was more students that we would traditionally consider to be weak, taking calculus, and on average, the grades higher in calculus. And so kids actually do better in calculus if you delay calculus and if you put some context and some math and context in front of it. counterintuitive result for us. This is what happened in the core engineering classes, right? So these are the 5 classes that we said the whole reason for this class was going to be. Physics, statics, dynamics, strength of materials, electric circuits. Chronologically, this is sort of the order that this occurs. I mean, certainly for mechanical engineers, circuits is at the end of the sophomore year. Might be at the front end of the sophomore year for our double E's. Okay, but general physics, calculus-based over here. So here's what you saw. No difference in performance in physics, the very next class they took. No difference in performance in statics. Then you start moving down the curriculum more, and we get a statistically significant difference in dynamics and a statistically significant difference in strength of materials and a half a letter grade statistically significant difference in electric circuits. And so biggest impact in electric circuits, I think one part of that, I think there's 2 primary effects. Circuits cuts across all engineering curricula, okay? All the degree programs have circuits, electronics somewhere in there. And so we made that a key part of the curriculum. About 40% of the problems are circuits-based problems in our original rendition of this material. Over the years, we've added a lot more things like chemical and biomedical and civil just for motivation. But I think that's part of it. Our content is chock full of circuits. So mechanical engineers that would have otherwise maybe seen circuits for the first time in circuits class are really comfortable with inductors and capacitors and all of those things. Okay, but the other thing I think that has in common of these 3 courses all have a heck of a lot more math, right? Dynamics, strength of materials, you're using integrals in meaningful ways to calculate elongation of, deformation, all those kind of things here. You're not really using calculus a whole lot at all in physics or in statics, right? There's calculus in the book, but in the end, you're using the gray box and you're doing a bunch of algebra and drawing a free body diagram. Okay? And so the vector mechanics, vector algebra, but not really calculus. So the courses that use calculus and differential equations, we saw a significant difference in student performance. And here's the one that really matters if you're an administrator. This is, did you get an engineering degree? The entire population. So the one on the left is the whole thing. 258 students that had taken the first year engineering math course, all right, as part of the degree program requirement. 1,738 students that did not take the class because they either got here 4 years before it started, or they were so far behind they dropped out before they even took our class. They're in there too. Or they're computer science majors, but here's the difference. More than a factor of 2. In fact, this is a 25.7% graduation rate. This is 56.2. As you start to break this down in different groups, one thing you can say is, hey, that's not really fair because we know computer science drives everybody out, so let's get them out of here. And we did that, and this is the result when you get computer science out. So it's about a factor of 2 instead of a little more than a factor of 2. And then something really interesting. You look at underrepresented students. And for us, this is female students and minority students. Now, Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio, particularly during this time, almost no minorities besides African American students from Dayton Public Schools. So that's pretty much it. The Hispanic population, close to 0, maybe 1%. And so that's who this is. And if you look over here, we have females separately. So there were 42 women that took the course, 55 underrepresented. So what you've got is an additional 13 black males from Dayton Public Schools, most likely, that are in this group. And here's the other one, 381. So what you see is that in the traditional curriculum, the blue, the success rate for underrepresented students is the lowest of all, about 20%. 4 out of 5 don't get degrees. It's because they walk into the first year classroom and they look around, and A, if they're from Dayton Public Schools, I don't care if they're white or black, they're behind in math. Okay, that's number one. If they're a girl, they were probably encouraged, yeah, you did good in science, you ought to try engineering, you like physics, you did good in math, go try this. And they walk into the room and they look around, and they're thinking like, all right, I'm going to give this a try, but just give me a reason to go do liberal arts or something else. And engineering programs all over the country give the women reasons to leave. Okay, what we do is we give them a reason to stay. You can do the same problems you're going to do over the next 2 years, maybe even classes in senior year. You're going to work these problems right now and believe that you can do this. Okay, and then what happens is those same students double down on their effort, because ultimately what graduates students is work ethic, right? And they try harder. So what happened is, instead of traditionally graduating at the lowest rate, now in Wright State Engineering, if you are black or female, you have a higher chance of earning an engineering degree as long as you take engineering math. That is a true statement. So it's the highest overall rate, over 60%. It is a tripling of the throughput of degrees awarded. An interesting thing, too, is the minority piece is really in there because we sorted out high poverty. So let's just look at kids that are economically disadvantaged, and the effect is not as great, right? And also, here's the females, right? And so here's the minority. So those 13 black males are dropping that thing down, right, in the traditional population. If you compare this, 381 to 244, that's a significant 100 and something additional underrepresented students. So really, it has a significant impact specifically on students that are minorities and that are underprepared in their efficacy and their ability to get a degree. And then one thing you have to do is, and let me preface this comparison is a little severe because, again, what if you were starting in developmental math and whatever, you dropped out of Wright State before you even got to us? Okay, that's a concern. So in some sense, that's not really a fair comparison. So what you need to do is parse it a little more and say, can we really compare the populations? So this is the entire population that took EGR 101, and this is the entire population that did not, the traditional population. So that's the breakdown by ACT. Okay, and so it's the entire range. I mean, we had kids from ACT 16 all the way to 36 that took the class. And over here, that did not. It went all the way down to ACT 14 bin. And so there it is. Interesting. You see this gap right about here where we lost population. This is the remediation piece I'll talk about more. These students all dropped out of the program before they ever got to us. And you can see the bulge in this population here. These are the students that dropped out of this population over here. But the bottom line is, even though, right, about here, our curriculum reform was designed to hit the median American student. That was the idea, right? And then you figure out how to get a standard deviation to the left of that forward. Okay, but the bottom line is the prereq for our class is about placement in pre-calculus. So you can be about 1 semester behind calc and enroll in our class right in the fall. You're more than 1 semester behind, we got to do something else with you. And again, I'll talk about what that is. Okay, so even so, students that made it through traditional remediation and got into our class, there was 39 of them with an ACT 23 or below. Right? Kids that wouldn't even get accepted to most engineering programs. Okay? But on average, these kids were about an ACT 26, and the traditional population was an ACT 24. So there is a difference. The difference is 1 bin. It's a 1 bin difference. Okay? And so the question is that why we had such a big difference in success? Well, here's the result. Did you earn a degree sorted by your ACT score? And this is the most compelling piece of retention data that I've yet seen in higher education. And here's the reason. Number one, it makes the point that ACT is predictive of whether or not you can get a degree if your curriculum is a traditional one. And because the median student in the country, less than 1 out of 5 earns a degree, right? Right here, ACT 24. Okay, even strong students, ACT 30, these kids aren't engaged enough, they don't feel like they're making progress towards the degree they wanted, and they get sucked up by their gen eds and the liberal arts and whatever else, and they're gone. Okay, so we got that there too. You put in 1 curricular reform, 1 class, decouple some prereqs, and we have wiped out the entire effect of ACT on whether or not you get an engineering degree. It is a uniform distribution. You could be an ACT 20, you could be an ACT 28. The entire range from developmental math to calculus ready. That's the problem, folks. The traditional curriculum, you uncork that bottleneck and the entire population now has a chance if you do the first year right. And so a gigantic impact on that. And again, the reason why traditionally ACT works is it doesn't predict your capability. Right? If it predicted your capability, we couldn't turn it into a uniform distribution. What it does is it predicts your starting point. And if we hold that starting point and we take kids and we put them in intermediate algebra and wait till they come back to us, right? Or kids that are calc ready, we send to the math department and say, here's a year and a half before you can advance. We're never going to graduate more than 1 and 3. Right? So it is the starting point that matters. And then, this is interesting. If you're an administrator and you're wondering how you're going to fund this thing, if you want to do this, okay, here's a note about tuition revenues in general and really the effect of math placement on the entire higher education system. So what this plot is what about the exact same cohort? 258 that took engineering math, 1738 that didn't. Why not add the whole rest of the Wright State population for the same 6 years? 11,533 incoming students. Just look at the green. These are non-engineers. If you're an art history major, your ability to get a Wright State degree is linearly predicted by your ACT math score. Does that make any sense to anybody in this room? Right? Doesn't matter what your major is. Okay? It's because the entire higher education structure is, come on in, it's time for orientation. The dorm room is over there. Here's the coffee shop, and please walk in there and take a math placement test. And take the math placement test. Oh, I'm sorry. You're just like most of the people, and you're a math placement 2, which means we're going to start you in developmental math, okay? Or maybe worse, math placement 0 or 1. So you'll take, 3 semesters of developmental math, and then you'll take intermediate algebra, and then you can take math in the modern world, right, which is the first class that will let you into the College of Liberal Arts. Right, so this isn't just an engineering problem. It is the entire higher education structure. What do we do about the fact that kids aren't ready for college level math? And we know they're not, right? So we can work on fixing K-12, but I suggest we work on fixing what we do with the kids once they're here. And so here's what you see. What happened even if I switch majors? The traditional population is the blue. Just compare the blue and the green right now. Every single ACT bin. Traditionally, if you come to Wright State and you pick engineering, your odds of getting any Wright State degree are lower. You're better off starting in business, you're better off starting in liberal arts, communications, whatever, better chance of getting a degree. We make one curricular change, first year engineering math, decouple our own bottleneck, and here's our result. Every single ACT bin, in fact now, if you come to Wright State University and you are bad at math, ACT 24 or below, college algebra or lower, what you ought to do is you ought to sign up for engineering. Because if you sign up for engineering, you take engineering math, you've got a better chance of getting a business degree than somebody that went straight to business. This is the reality at Wright State. And it's the reason because everybody else still bottlenecks their curriculum with, remediation. Okay? Ours was bottlenecked by required curriculum and remediation. So in the end, this is the result. 70% of our kids got a Wright State degree compared to 46% the rest of Wright State, the green bars. Yes?
What's that ACT 16?
Yeah, so this is interesting, right? So a couple points. The stars are statistical significance, so there is none here. If you go back to the population, what that is, that ACT 16, it's this one kid here. But I would be willing to bet that we are the only ABET accredited electrical engineering program in the country that graduated a kid with an ACT 16 in math. Baccalaureate degree. So Ken's laughing, right? But the reality is, the kids still had to take Circuits 1 and Circuits 2 and EMAG and, all the rest of it, linear systems and upper division classes in electronics. So this is not about get the requirements out of the way and let the bad kids through, right? It's about, do we beat people down based on their starting point, or do we start thinking about where is our value added in higher education? That's impact. Taking kids ACT 22 and 23 and graduating them is a much greater achievement than taking a kid that's an ACT 32 and convincing them not to switch to liberal arts. Okay, so think about that. That is the future of the United States. And then finally, the same point. In the end, did we graduate a whole bunch of kids with lower initial ACTs? Heck yes, we did. Does that mean our population of graduates is weak and nobody wants to hire them? Well, I don't know. Kids that took EGR 101, on average, barely P.1, not really any difference overall. If we get the CS majors out, we barely get a P.05, a slightly higher grade point average of the kids that took the class. Okay? Biggest effect, right here. Underrepresented students, and here's what's interesting. High poverty, nothing. So it's not the district, it's are you black? Right? That's it. It's that perception piece and that efficacy piece. It's not just was your school district bad. And over here, here's the females, very little difference also. So this piece right here, again, what basically happened is we went from an average GPA of underrepresented women and minorities below 3.0 to an average GPA at graduation of 3.2. And so, where do your employers cut off the interviews? It's about 3.0. Okay, so moving the average past the cutoff is significant in terms of being able to graduate people that are employable, getting industry support for generating the kind of pipeline that they want. Right? They want to hire underrepresented students, but too many students are getting out with 2.7 GPAs and they don't even make the first cut. All right, so a couple points about what you can do here. Pre-college implementations. We've been running dual enrollment, our class, at an area high school for about 5 years, and now it's really starting to pick up in Dayton. We've got the Dayton Regional STEM School. We've got a Catholic prep school that's running the class. I had the principal of the Miami Valley School, which has $20,000 a year tuition for high school. So it's the most elite place in all of Dayton, and I think they're going to run our class a year later. Okay, so it's a real opportunity to recruit top students, and we have NSF LSANT and STEM grants targeting applications of dual enrollment of this class in Dayton public schools for advanced preparation and recruitment of minority students. So that's an avenue. We've done outreach programs with our course content. Right here in the DC area, there's a 36-week version of our exact curriculum that runs at Chantilly High School Academy. It's actually been approved by the state of Virginia as pre-college engineering curriculum now. Okay, and so we hope that expands in the state. But even right here in DC, our class has run by the University of Maryland at Friendship Collegiate Academy, Oxon Hill High. Lots of school districts around the country are now considering this to help recruit kids and prepare kids. And then this is the grant that's funding the current operation. So the 400 grand, again, most recently highlighted as Howard and Morgan State and Eastern Shore. And really the hope of this, the reason I am here today, was Don Millard's belief that if we could move the needle at even one of these three, that we would have an audience, because there's 13 ABET accredited institutions and there's representation from every one right here today. Okay, that can we then as a community decide, we graduate 26% of America's black engineers, what if we could double our output of graduates, period, right? And think about then the impact on the national production of underrepresented students. Okay, this is a curriculum change that has the potential to make that happen. Okay, and so here's where we are in terms of nationwide. I can't keep up with the dots. In fact, we got Oregon State now has a proposal pending, so we'll get them in. But lots and lots of places all over the place dabbling in this at various scales. High schools, community colleges, all the four-year institutions you saw up there. A total of 20 different institutions have had NSF subcontracts through our grants, but we are well past 3 dozen now. So there are lots and lots of institutions that are saying, look, when you are doubling the degrees awarded, the return on investment is 10 to 1, right? The tuition revenue alone from the students that don't drop out, and then the state subsidy for course and degree completion, it is millions of dollars on your budget to retain these students. Okay? It will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement this correctly at large scale. It's about 10 to 1. Okay? The argument you have to make is you got to make the hundreds of some $1,000 investment first, and you got to believe you can do this right and get the same kind of results we have, and then it pays for itself. Again, it's about 10 to 1. So, a couple guidelines on implementation, since this is what I would really like to see coming out of this group, and certainly the ones that are trying so far, is number one, you got to get upper administrators to buy the business argument that I just made. Okay, tuition revenues from increased retention, also all the states in the country that are now doing funding based on course and degree completion. State of Ohio, it's going to be 50% of the funding model now. Again, it pays for itself huge. You got to get a faculty member to champion this thing. So if you can be like Morgan State and get the National Teaching Award winner like Jakob over here to be the teacher, that's what you should do. Okay, and that's what they're doing at Morgan State. But really, you can destroy any great curriculum by putting a bad faculty member in the classroom, so don't do it. Okay, so get an award-winning teacher that's also an effective educator, and then resource them. Pay them a month's summer salary to prep for this thing. Give them a team of top undergraduate student TAs that are a lot cheaper than grad students, all right? Or you can add some grad students if you want, and that's how you get this done. Okay, and that's this point. Resource the course appropriately. I can talk about all those details if anyone wants to follow up with me. Okay, and then this piece, make sure whatever you put in place has pipelines. You know, articulation agreements with community colleges, all the community colleges in the region here. Montgomery College is one that is running our class in the fall. All right, and we've had some interest and some bites from Northern Virginia as well. So there's places around you could set up unique articulation agreements and pathways here, and then the rest of the HBCU institutions outside of DC. Okay, and then the final point that I promised Jakob I would make is my bigger pulpit preach about what we do with underprepared kids in math in general. All right, so what I've talked about so far is how do you fix the required curriculum, and that is step one. Fix the required curriculum. Step two is, okay, my median kid's not ready for the required curriculum. Now what do I do? Okay, and here's the thing. Every engineering program in the country does this wrong. Okay, and again, this statement's not endorsed by the National Science Foundation. This is my opinion. Okay, but I've got graduates to prove it. All right, so here's what I think you ought to do. I think you ought to put in something like EGR 101, and students that are calc ready, okay, or above, you just take this. I don't care if you got AP credit for Calc 1 and 2. Your best students, they just take this in the fall. They don't take calculus. Get calculus out of the fall term. Just get it out. It's a spring course. Okay? That's recommendation number one. Number two, even if you're behind Calc by one class, pre-calculus, whatever the class is right before Calc, well, these kids are only one class behind being on time. So I say, throw a bone to the math department and say, you know what? That's cool. You can have these kids. Enroll them in EGR 101 at the same time, okay? So that now the prereqs are clear for advancement in engineering no matter what happens in pre-calc, and those same kids are taking calc in the spring with all the calc-ready kids. So you change that whole perception, and now you get about 40% of your entire enrollment that feels like they're exactly on track, right? The fact that they took pre-calc, well, so what? The calc-ready kids were taking a gen ed or whatever else. They don't feel behind. It's all about perception. I'm here, I'm on track. So kids one class behind are really on track. Okay, then here's the thing. If you are more than one class behind, college algebra, intermediate algebra, developmental math, okay, do not send these kids to the math department for an entire string of classes that don't count for their degree. That's what you do now. Don't do it. And I can say that's what you do now because that's what everybody does. That's why we have math departments. That's why they run classes like college algebra. Okay. College algebra is not in the degree program for any engineering major. It's not in the degree program for any STEM major at all. The whole purpose of college algebra is to get kids ready for calculus. Yet nationwide, the success rate's 50%. Okay. And in fact, Yuri Treisman over at Austin, right, is another guy. Both of us are content experts for an organization called Complete College America, and it's all about how do you get kids across the pipeline. And this guy is a mathematician, so he's a nationally known guy, the most respected guy on what do you do with math pipelines. And he threw out an interesting stat at a Complete College America meeting in Boston in the spring. And it's a little misleading, but when you just look at the number, it's really funny. And see if you guys know the answer. The whole purpose of college algebra, because it's not in the degree program, is to get kids ready for the calculus sequence. Nationwide, what percentage of kids that take college algebra ever complete Calc 2? Who wants to take credit for that? 10%?
50%.
50%?
25%.
25%? Okay, the answer is 1%. Okay, 99% of people who take college algebra never even take calculus 2. In fact, that's a bigger point besides engineering bottlenecks. If you've got kids at the HBCUs in like health sciences and their required math class is statistics, what the heck are you doing making them take college algebra? Oh, I'm sorry, their math placement test said they can't enroll in statistics yet, so we're going to send them to the math department until they can do this. Okay? That's what you do if you don't want to graduate health science majors. And so don't take my word for this. This is well-known stuff. Go to Complete College America and look at system-wide studies with tens of thousands of students, entire states have done things like enroll kids in the class that they're not prepared for, and then add co-requisite remediation mandatory along the way, right? How many students come out the other end is the benchmark you want, not the success rate in the course itself. You put kids in bottlenecks, right? This is the one takeaway. Do not enroll students in an entire sequence of classes that are not in their degree program, period. Don't do it. So you say, they're engineers, they're intermediate algebra, even developmental, what the heck do I do with these kids? You, as engineering faculty, I take a two-tiered approach like we do at Wright State. Number one, run a summer bridge program and see what you can do with just plain knocking the cobwebs off the kids that just need that, right? And you'll get a big chunk of them fixed just with that. But it can't just be self-selected, who wants to sign up, whatever. It needs to be, mandatory, large-scale kind of implementations. Or, if you can't get mandatory in the summer, because I understand that's hard, you could say, well, how about the fall? Right? And again, feel like, well, we can't do this, look, this is not even a faculty-controlled decision. This is an administration-controlled decision. It is student advising policy. In the College of Engineering at Wright State, the whole rest of the university takes all their intending majors and sits them in a university queue, and they make decisions about how to remediate kids and everything else. Not us. Everybody from an ACT 16 to 36. Mandatory academic advising in my building. When I put an intervention in that says 150 kids that are in intermediate algebra aren't going to the math department, that's not even something that requires curricular approval. College algebra is not in the degree program. No one has to take it. They only take it because you put them in it. Stop putting them in it, right? So you put in a class and you say, hey, how about we review all of high school math, but let's do it in context. And while we're at it, let's use things like ALEX or other kind of targeted remediation strategies that are individualized and self-paced so that one kid can be working on logarithms while the other one's working on exponents, and you don't have to go through a year and a half of this in order to be ready. You can target where the deficiencies are, get the kids to master it, and then hold that line. Before you take EGR 101, you will demonstrate mastery, right, by the math department's own standards in their assessment tool. At Wright State, that assessment tool is ALEX. Okay? And we're not going to enroll kids starting this fall in EGR 101 until they demonstrate pre-calc proficiency. Okay? So it does two things. It gets the entire bottleneck of courses out of the way. Courses that drive down the grade point average of all your intending students make it less likely for them to advance and be admitted to your college, right? Get that out of the way, give them overwhelming support, do it in context, and give every single student a one-semester path to calculus. So again, the title of the slide is Recommended Math Pathways. This is my recommendation. You can take it or leave it, but for sure, what you do now, if you send kids to intermediate algebra, college algebra, pre-calculus, trigonometry, before calc, if you're doing that, that doesn't work. Just mind your own institutional data and see how many come back. Yes?
Yeah, I agree with you. It happens all the time. I've seen it at State University, predominant State University as well, HBCU.
Yep.
And in fact, about 6% of the students who want to go into engineering have taken remedial math, what I found. And
Yep.
stats were the same at both predominant university as well as HBCU. The thing is that we get locked, we hold hostage by the math department so far. They say, hey, you want to get in calculus, okay, you got to have at least a 24 in ACT in math. Otherwise, we're going to put you in the pre-calculus algebra and trig sequence. So you're saying...
So here's what I would argue. A decision like that is actually an administrative advising decision. Okay, so your perception is that's the way you do things, and therefore you're held hostage by the math department. But the reality is, people like vice presidents of enrollment management and deans of colleges can change student advising policy. And so what the math department does hold is curricular control over the prereqs for their own classes. Okay, so ACT is one way. I would assume they must also have a math placement test somewhere in there.
Well, I had students take the CLEP test,
Yeah.
got into calculus.
So there's that. So whatever your institution has, here's what I would say. You don't want to get into the argument with the math department of what is the requirement for a student to take calculus. What you want to do is change the way you get students to fulfill that requirement. So at Wright State, like the way and we've only recently made this change, but we used to have Compass, which is an ACT-based math placement testing, and that was always like, now we just use ACT as the automatic, and if you don't like your placement, you can use ALEKS. And the beauty of that is, math placement testing doesn't fix anybody, right? But you use something like ALEKS, where it's got assessment and remediation modules, where you go through it, you know you're not where you need to be, and then you're hit with 10 problems at a time in every single area that you're not where you need to be, and the amount of effort you put in is what determines whether or not you're ready. So if you just drop that in students' laps, you're just going to get an assortment of students that are self-starters and ones that aren't, and you're not going to be very happy with it. So you need to couple that with well-known best practices in student affairs, like mandatory. So for example, you come in and you're one class behind. Okay, then you could do something like, well, you're going to be like 2 days a week now, mandatory attendance in the math help room, right, using ALEKS or whatever. But if you're 3 classes behind, now you're going to be there Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, mandatory. All right, so don't let kids make decisions about what's best for them because they don't know. Okay, and make the decisions based on research and known best practices in student affairs, right? And the things like this is more like a proposal at this point, but to me it's just intensely obvious. Okay, and the other point I would make is we have done what I'm talking about here. We have a course that's a precursor to EGR 101 for that whole fat part of the population that's in intermediate algebra or college algebra. And when we put that in place, we doubled the first year retention number of that population. And when you couple that with the fix to the required degree program, okay, over the course of our STEP grant that we had, which had basically that tandem punch going, we went from 158 degrees awarded in 0506, 158, 295 degrees awarded last year. We are not talking about small changes. We're talking about factor changes in degree production. Okay, but it can only be done when you do it large scale and you put mandatory participation of students and you resource it appropriately. Okay, and that's the way you get it done. But I mean, that difference, if you sit back and you calculate the tuition collected and the subsidy generated by going from 158 to 295, it is millions and millions of dollars of revenue for the institution. And those those incoming classes that cost to do that, it's about a couple $100,000 a year to implement.
Did I get it right that the academic year is 3/4?
It was for all of this longitudinal study, so we have moved to semesters starting in fall 2012. So we now have the required curriculum, and the short of that is calculus in a regular semester curriculum is just shifted by one semester, and the prereqs are decoupled. So that's all it is. So Calc 1 is a spring course, Calc 2 and 3 are sophomore year, so the Calc is actually done in sophomore year, and we actually have DiffEQs with matrix at the same time as multivariate Calc in the spring. Okay.
So are the results that you've shown within the semester system or the quarter system?
The results that we have shown are the classes of 04, 05, 06, so that's the quarter system. Okay, but again, it's a lot harder to do this on a 10-week quarter than it is on a 15-week semester. So the semester piece of this, I mean, in fact, I still teach the class. I've taught it every year since its inception, and we get about 12.5% more contact time in the semester, 3-hour, as opposed to the 4-hour lecture on quarters. And so what I'm able to do is slow down a little bit and then get some more examples in. But we did not change the content at all. It's the exact content now as it was before.
One more question.
One
Yeah.
final
And then
question
we go for lunch, and then you guys can still talk.
Yeah.
He
Do
talks.
you
He
think
likes to
that
talk.
a pre-college, a summer program of EGR 101, and then going to calculus in the first semester,
It's better than nothing. The question was, what if you just did the content as a pre-college kind of prep thing? There's a lot of things about it in terms of motivation and efficacy of students, and I've got a lot of research and stuff that's actually in here, and I knew I didn't have time to talk about it. So it has a clear impact on student motivation and efficacy and all those things that help, but I really believe that the kind of results we have, where we're doubling degree production, that's a result of the entire curriculum reform. It's because the bottleneck is uncorked. So if you run this in the summer and you get the entire incoming class to take it, and you uncork the bottleneck and enroll all the kids in calc in the fall, and if they're struggling to get a C, they can take a W, and it doesn't stop them from taking physics, then that would probably work. But if you just do it to motivate the kids, I think you'll get better retention of high-end students that wouldn't struggle in calc anyway, but the average student struggles in calc, so you're going to still have a problem with your average and your median population.
How is set up the prerequisites for the courses such as statics, dynamics, fluid mechanics, spatial dynamics, and fluid mechanics?
Yeah, so the question is, what do you do with the prereqs literally? So you can mine your own prereqs and see what they currently say. Usually the bottleneck on the prereq is general physics. So you sit down with the physics faculty and you slide up across the textbook and say, this is the math we'd like to cover, and we'd like you to consider making this an alternative prerequisite for general physics 1, right? And so you can leave the existing Calc 1, Calc 2, CoRec, whatever in place, but then you say, or EGR 101. And if a physics faculty looks at the content of our book, they're just going to start smiling when they flip through it. And they're going to be like, yeah, this is way better than what they do in calculus. So it's not a hard sell. Once you get physics, engineering mechanics a lot of times doesn't even have separate prereqs. It just says general physics 1. If it also says Calc 1 and Calc 2 and general physics 1, then you need the engineering faculty to make a curricular change. So like for us, circuits used to say differential equations, right, which comes after the third calc. It used to say that. Our engineering faculty changed the prerequisite. And again, that's an internal thing within engineering. The math department has really no say about that.